So welcome to the first episode of Riga Security Forum. I have the pleasure to talk to Dr. Julian Lindley, French chairman of the Alpen group. And apart from the many credentials that you have, I would like to emphasize the friendships that Latvians are sharing with you.
Thank you.
Your knowledge about the region, and also your contribution and advice to the Baltics when sometimes we don't see the coming challenge ourselves. We're small countries. We can discuss local matters with each other, but sometimes we don't see the big picture. And therefore I would like to ask, since there is a turbulence in international affairs and things are moving pretty fast, especially for the Baltic states or small states in Europe who have not probably get used to the speed and the scope and magnitude of the events that are evolving around us. We kind of expected the return of Donald Trump during the pre-election campaign. The fight was tough. The polls were suggesting Kamala Harris would win, but eventually Trump won the swing states and became the president of the United States for the second time. All this has caused anxiety, uncertainty in international affairs. The relationship between the United States and Europe that provided security also to the Baltic states, especially since 2004, seems to be rupturing from one point. From the other point, Trump has suggested Europeans will be as good as allies as the United States if we keep up with the military spending and become an equal partner with the United States. Should we be concerned about Trump or Trumpism staying after Trump, or this policy of uncertainty continuing to infuse some anxiety in our alliances?
Well, first, Sandis, lovely to see you. Good to be back here in Riga. Latvia is very important to me. With all the Baltic states, the three Baltic states, you're on the front line of freedom, and freedom should matter to every Democrat in Europe. It's really what we defend. And my colleagues, my friends here in Latvia, they really know what it is that freedom means. In my own country, the UK, I think that's less so these days. And to some extent, the United States as well. And the problem for the Baltic states is not Eastern Europeans, Central Europeans, it's not Poland, it's not other countries in the region, it's Western Europeans. We've become complacent. And the problem for the United States is that whether it appears in the guise of Trump, there is a structural problem for the United States, which is that with the rise of China as a military as well as an economic power, with the nature of Russia as it is, a very traditional Russia. This is not a new Russia. This is a new old Russia that we're confronting. That the United States cannot be strong everywhere all of the time. Now, if the Europeans, the Western Europeans in particular, really mean what they say they mean in their treaty commitments to Latvia and others, then we have two options. One, we actually invest in the armed forces and the resources that we need to deter Vladimir Putin. So that in his mind, there is simply not any circumstances in which he could imagine a successful military attack on any member of the EU or NATO. The second is almost a transitional option, is to keep America strong where she needs to be strong. Either way, it means that the big three Western Europeans, as Britain, France and Germany, who are over 50% of defence expenditure in Europe, those three alone, 67% plus of defence investment, and some 90% of all defence advanced technology development. These countries have got to take the lead together. And the last 10 years, partly because of Brexit, partly because of internal political dynamics in these respective countries, have been very difficult, have not been working together. I hope that's coming to an end. I hope that they will recognise that the NATO in which we all believe can only survive if burden sharing means helping America lead, and those three countries in particular re-engaging with the Article 5 defense of Europe, and that Vladimir Putin, under no circumstances, as I've said, believes that he has a chance of a successful invasion of Eastern Europe. The problem is that, take my own country, Britain, you know, we're a nuclear power. We're a nuclear armed island. We have extremely capable intelligence services. We know that short of an all-out nuclear war, that Putin's not really a threat to us. He might attack our information systems, he might attack undersea infrastructure, but we can do things back to Russia as well, which we do and would. But the mentality of solidarity upon which deterrence is based, it's not just about capability, it's not about investment, it's about a mentality, a mindset of solidarity, that we are there for you. We need to rebuild that. Partly, as I said, due to Brexit, partly because of internal politics in our own countries. The Russians are not stupid, nor are their Chinese allies. What they've done is carry out a systematic audit of the vulnerabilities of open societies. So, for example, everyone talks as though as long as Russia's military is engaged in Ukraine, in that appalling bloodbath that is taking place as we speak, they're not really a threat to NATO or the EU. I think that's complacent. The Russians, in their mind, the Russian leadership, believe they're already at war with free Europe, and with what I call the global free, and in Europe in particular. And they might not wish to impose an empire upon the Baltic states again, but they do want to impose their influence through intimidation and through coercion. So if they can cause chaos through information warfare, through cyber warfare, through critical infrastructure sabotage on countries like Britain, France and Germany, but others as well, Italy, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, etc., and convince these nations that the risk is too high to fulfill their NATO obligations, then steadily, without a single Russian soldier setting foot on Latvian soil, they'll start to impose their influence, their writ, their edict on the government and people of Latvia. And we need to counter that. And we need to counter that by simply not leaving the information space and the cyberspace to the Kremlin. If they attack us with information warfare, we attack them back. If they attack us with cyber warfare, we attack them back. They have got to understand that every form of aggression they use, every form of coercion they use, has a price attached to it. Because that, with due respect to Russian colleagues, that is how they understand power. And it's that Western Europeans in particular have become very decadent, very complacent about the application of power.
Thank you. I think it's really great. And you said we need to do, we need to act, we need to react, and
we.
Yeah. The question is, like in the past, usually when there is a crisis in transatlantic relationship, like Suez 1956, you know, when Americans really didn't know what the Europeans together with Israelis is going to do, like in the Middle East. And when we face external challenges, during the Cold War, of course, it was the Soviet Union, now it's the Russia. The question is like, and there are many crises you already mentioned, like Brexit, domestic politics, democracies. As ugly as it gets, it seems that this still is the only system that can sustain itself. And those countries that are against the international liberal order, China gaining from it the economic power and building the military on the economic base, you know, it's like by undermining this order, they might actually be the biggest losers in the long-term perspective. But what should be, or what could be the biggest trigger for the Europeans? Maybe Britain returning to Europe after Europe becomes simpler with less bureaucracy, more British. This was our hope when we joined the European Union. It was like the British hope that the old good like Balts will become EU member states and we will make this organization less French. The question is, what should be or could be possibly the next trigger for Europeans to talk as one, to be united. It seems that this unity is more evident with the Baltic states. At least in security affairs, we talk about the Baltic cooperation, almost like before we became NATO and EU members, which was lost. Now with Russia, it's back again, and we are better as a Baltic state. The question is, like, what should happen with Europe for us to be united again?
Well, first I would say that our leaders need to grow up. They have been strategically illiterate, too many of them, in recent years. Now, there are good reasons for that. They had 3 smacks in the face: the banking and financial crisis, Eurozone crisis, 2008-2010, Brexit, COVID. These were huge shocks that destroyed the financial base of many European countries, partly because they'd over-invested in globalization, which was a big mistake. I said at the time it was a big mistake, but it seemed very attractive to economists. Economists, by the way, are the most dangerous people in Europe because they get everything wrong and don't understand how wars start.
I thought those are lawyers.
And lawyers.
And lawyers.
With lawyers.
Yeah.
Particularly bad. On democracy, Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst political system in the world, apart from every other.
Yeah.
And that is true. It's messy. But we know that democracies, when they are led responsibly, by people who are honest with their electorate about the dangers that we all face, can be and are far stronger than any dictatorship, because it's that essential commodity of trust. Let me deal with Brexit, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about Britain and Brexit. I understood totally why my fellow Britons voted to leave the EU. I actually campaigned to remain in the EU because I simply thought it was bad geopolitics, that we were outside this very important institution at the centre of British influence. The real reason was that if you look at English history in particular and English political culture, we have never liked distant, unaccountable power. The French model of an elite bureaucracy who run everything on behalf of the people and can be trusted, that is totally against the English way of doing politics. It led to the first English Civil War in the 17th century. It led to the American Revolution in the 18th century. No taxation without representation. And there was a growing sense, where I come from in Sheffield in the north of England, and in many English cities, that the EU simply wasn't democratic. And the British people were not having it. And they made it very clear they will not accept a return to the EU unless those issues are dealt with. And I always thought that we all made a big mistake around Brexit, because Brussels was trying to gain ever more power, because Brussels does that. Bureaucracies always try to gain more power. There was a lack of leadership from Merkel. There was a lack of leadership from London, lack of leadership elsewhere. But if we presented the EU as a super alliance of free peoples, not a union in which power would get ever further away from the citizen and be placed in some super utopian Brussels, far distant away from where people lived. If it had been a super alliance of nation states, which is what it was meant to be, then Brexit would never have happened. And I still hope that we can create that super alliance. Why? Because legitimacy in freedom matters. And legitimacy is when power is accepted by the people as being legitimate, i.e. acting in their name. And when you talk about defence, the first duty of the state is the protection of the citizen. If the citizen believes that they are invested in the body politic, the polis, in the sovereign body that is defending them, then they will engage. If they feel it's some kind of empire far away, and many Brits did feel it was kind of an empire, the EU, they were wrong, but that's how they saw it, then you will get what we've seen in the last 10, 15 years, a kind of indifference of citizens who think that they have no influence, that control is always over there. We've got to engage our citizens again, not just for the sake of bringing Britain closer to its European homeland, but also for ensuring that when we have to take tough actions to stop Russian interference, Russian aggression, that governments feel they can do that without political disaster taking place.
This is like this Anglo-Saxon tradition where the people have actually, where the leaders are approachable. This is why we love the Brits and Americans very much. Therefore, you have to tell us what to do to get the Britain back. And the EU changed. But in these times, there are things that the small nations bordering Russia, frontline currently, even though there's active military action, it seems like this hybrid warfare, Russia's willingness to test us, our resolve to support Ukraine by giving all that we have and maintaining some of the stuff to defend ourselves too, keep the architecture of the European security in a state that we would like it to see in the future, so we have the possibility to rebuild. And I think these democratic traditions, especially, I think they are undervalued in Europe. Those who don't like democracy, as ugly as it looks, should think about like sending the kids to the school where they are not allowed to communicate freely, express their ideas freely about a society that is not able to bring their ideas to the leaders about a brighter future. This is alternative to what Russia wants to impose and the model that Russia has created, for example, in Georgia. What would be your major policy recommendation for the Baltic states to avoid this predicament of becoming someone's vassal and losing democratic values in the future?
Well, let me deal with that at several levels. At the strategic level, at the defense strategic level, I would advise your leaders to stop being idiots. Because when you stop being idiots, then we'll stop being idiots. Give you an example, Rail Baltica. This is an important step for improved military mobility. The bottom line for a country like Latvia, and I had this conversation with NATO generals who are friends of mine in the last few days when I knew I was coming here, about military mobility. And I said to one of them, you know, what question should I ask when I'm chairing my panel at the conference? He said, oh, it's very clear. Can the Latvians survive 2 weeks at least before NATO land forces can get to them to properly engage Russian forces? Now imagine that the Russians, who are learning the lessons of Ukraine, don't underestimate the Russian General Staff, they are learning the lessons of Ukraine. My great friend Hans Binnendijk just written a piece where he estimates between 3 and 5 years for the Russians to rebuild after the war in Ukraine has been stopped, to rebuild their military. So imagine if they then invaded at some point in the future, 2035 or whenever, got to conquered Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania and just stopped. And it was they stopped in, say, 5 days. And we're still organising our forces in NATO. Deterrence by denial, which is NATO's official policy, would be gone. We'd have to rescue. And then it would be like Poland in World War II. In fact, the rescue of Poland took 60 years. When World War II broke out in September 1939, the liberation of Western Europe took 6 very bloody years. But we'd be in that kind of territory. What we have to do collectively is create the forces and resources that are sufficient to convince Putin that under any circumstances, any incursion would be a gamble that's simply not worth taking. That's it. Everyone talks too much rubbish about deterrence. Deterrence is simply we in the free West sending a message to President Putin that we understand what you want to do and we know how to stop you. And not only that, we are investing and making sure we know how to stop you. So when we do things like Rail Baltica, as an example, not being implemented because Riga wants a new station, or the railway line reaching the Estonian border and not being extended because of Latvian internal politics. That is stupidity. That is sending a message to Putin that we are not serious, because that rail line is a key axis for improved deterrence. And it's that action that I would, with due respect to your leaders, show us that you're serious and we'll be serious. For all the Hague Summit declarations and all this stuff, it comes down to those kind of local choices with big effect being made. Now, on the issue of freedom, I'm a passionate believer in free speech. But I also believe that free speech has responsibility. The whole point of free speech is it is exercised with responsibility. What do I mean by that? I mean by that children in school can ask any question they like as part of their learning. Citizens can ask any question they like. But they've got to have respect for everybody else in that society. It's built on respect. You can't have people just running around shouting obscenities or shouting provocative challenges to other people that cause social unrest. Then you get the likes of Russia deliberately trying to exacerbate that, to weaken our political unity. And that's why I think leaders really have to lead in the way that society expresses itself in freedom. There's no such thing as absolute freedom. That's anarchy. That's chaos. That's why we have laws and rules. But the difference between a democracy and an autocracy is that those laws and rules are wide. They're decided by people who were elected by the people and therefore are legitimate. In an autocracy, it's simply one man or an oligarchy, there's to be a man, with complete and utter prejudiced, absolute control over what everybody says and does. And you have experienced that in your country too often, and it's that we are defending.
Absolutely. If Europe gives us the possibility to develop one Baltic project, Rail Baltica, let's not lose it to the political bickering. Let's respect each other and build a defense posture that signals Putin any entry in the Baltic States, information, any hybrid methods, political influencing, or trying to step on the Baltic soil will meet profound resistance and social resilience. Thank you so much. Thank you for the first Riga Security Forum episode. This is the opening episode. It was an honor to converse with you and provide some ideas for the Latvian decision makers who should grow a little bit smarter and build closer ties along the Anglo-Saxon traditions with the Latvian public. Thank you so much.
Sandis, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Same.
Thank you.